Hello, and many thanks for coming to join me this morning or this afternoon or whenever it is that you have come to join me. My name is David Goldsborough. I'm a local preacher in training in a church in Ilkley in West Yorkshire. My day job, however, is I'm a hospital consultant. I work in one of the large hospitals in Bradford, and I've worked there for, I think it'd be safe to say, quite some time. And over that time, I've worked with, I've lost count of how many colleagues. Medical colleagues, yes, but colleagues elsewhere in the hospital, colleagues within the department where I am, and colleagues throughout. And they're a very, very, very diverse bunch. People from all over the world, almost. I've worked with colleagues from India, from Pakistan, from the Middle East, from Iran, that's possibly the Near East, and from Europe as well, from Greece, from Eastern Europe, particularly a number of colleagues from Poland, but also from Western Europe, colleagues from the Netherlands, and from time to time, even an occasional American from across the pond. And also, of course, people from other parts of England, and whisper it gently, even a few Southerners, whisper it even more gently, even a few people from Lancashire. Now, of course, I'm a foreigner myself. I'm from Scotland. I grew up in Edinburgh, trained in Edinburgh, but I've been living in Yorkshire now for, the best part of 3 decades. So, where I work, where I live, we're a diverse bunch. It's a positive human melting pot. And by and large, we get on well. The occasional spat, of course, but we are human after all. But just like other people in the rest of this country, just like other people around the world, we're facing in Bradford, in my work situation, the COVID-19 pandemic, and that has been particularly challenging. It's perhaps easing slightly, but it remains particularly challenging. So, as I said, I'm a local preacher in training in a church in Ilkley. And this month we're sharing what's called the Bible Month. So over a period of 4 weeks, we're looking at a particular book in the Bible. And this time this year, we're looking at the Book of Ruth, which is in the Old Testament, perhaps better called the Hebrew Bible. Probably written somewhere between the 6th and the 4th century BC, and certainly probably reflecting events that are even older than that. It was written in Hebrew. It was written in troubled times. The people who lived in Israel then faced a number of challenges, including famine. But the Book of Ruth it's about ordinary people. But it's about ordinary people doing extraordinary things and responding to these challenges in extraordinary ways. So this week we're looking at the second chapter of the book, and the central characters are 2 women. Naomi, who lived in Israel, then had to go to the next door country of Moab because of the famine at the time. And there, her 2 sons married 2 Moab women, one of whom was Ruth. Ruth, the title character in this book. But after some time, when things got better in Israel, Naomi came back to Bethlehem, which is where she was from originally. And one of her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth, came with her, even though she was originally from the next door land. Now, in the second chapter of this book, we meet another character, a man called Boaz. Now, Boaz is a farmer, he's a landowner, but other than that, he is an ordinary person within Bethlehem. Now, when Ruth and Naomi came back to Bethlehem, they still faced challenges, they still faced difficulties. They had difficulty getting enough food to eat. But Ruth took matters to some extent, into her own hands. And she said to her mother-in-law Naomi that she was going to go out and to a field to glean, which was, under the law of the time, which was a right for those who were facing difficulty feeding themselves and their families. Gleaning meant that they could go round the edges of the field and pick up any corn or wheat that had not been harvested, and to some extent elsewhere in the field. But Ruth also, perhaps you might argue, pushed her luck and wanted to follow the harvesters in the main field itself. And this was perhaps out with the strict interpretation of the law at the time. But Boaz owned the field. And when he came to see what was happening, came to see how his workers were doing, he noticed this young woman that he had not seen before, and asked who she was. Now the workers, the first thing they said about her was that she was a foreigner. She wasn't from Israel, she came from Moab. But despite this, Boaz treated her very respectfully. He gave her 3 pieces of advice: that she should only work in that particular field, in his field, that she should work with the women in the field, and she should avoid perhaps the attentions, potentially, of the men working in the field. And this all reflected the difficult times that were ongoing in Israel. They were violent times, and the times also reflected a significant degree of sexual violence against women. So Boaz protected Ruth as she sought to get enough food to feed not just herself, but her mother-in-law. Now the story continues. Perhaps a spoiler alert here, it does end well, but hopefully you'll be able to join us over the next couple of weeks to hear how the story pays out. So this is a story from, well, at least 2.5 millennia ago, probably longer. It's a story that comes from a very different time, a very different place, I suspect, to most of us who are living today, and in a very different culture. So why would we want to read it today? Well, as in all stories that we read in the Bible, one of the most important things to do is to look at the relevance to how we live today, the resonances of the story in how we live today. Now, I've already said that the Book of Ruth is about ordinary people actually facing perhaps extraordinary challenges and facing them in extraordinary ways. It's a story of survival in difficult times. It's a story of individual vulnerability, probably also of community vulnerability. But it's also a story of inclusiveness. Inclusiveness perhaps where that might not be otherwise expected, where people had perceived differences, had perhaps entrenched differences. But this story transcends those differences. And it's also a story in which, as you read it, you look at your own or the perspectives of other people, and you look at the way that you've perhaps thought of those perspectives, and you think about those and challenge those. So, in that sense, the Book of Ruth is very much a story for today as we face challenges both personally and in our communities. It's very much a story that echoes with myself in the working environment where I'm working in Bradford in West Yorkshire, where the challenges that we face with the COVID-19 viral infection pandemic are still there and are still prevalent. And it's a story, a very human story, that reflects and acknowledges how different people from different places, from different cultures, should live together to face difficult times. A message that really does resonate with the people that I meet on a daily basis where I work. But you might ask, where is God in this story? You've probably noticed I haven't actually used the word God up till now. And in fact, commentators who look at the Book of Ruth, they actually reflect that God's not mentioned very often, and that the main characters are very human. But God is prominent in, perhaps you might almost say, a subliminal way throughout the Book of Ruth. And it is the loving kindness that God shows to his creation that shines through the whole story of the Book of Ruth, and particularly shines through the part of the story that we're looking at today, as Boaz shows that loving kindness to Ruth. And as such, it's a story of inclusiveness. And it shows how God works through all sorts of different people, perhaps all peoples. So perhaps as we read the Book of Ruth, and I would encourage you to do that, we should choose that loving kindness that God has to offer us. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy the book.